I will surrender my position as empress. Chapter 7. What do you think about the Witch of Kotrov? From AudiNovel. Adelheid, a princess by birth, had always been surrounded by people who managed every aspect of her life, allowing her to live carelessly. But despite her privileged upbringing, Adelheid couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost more than she had gained. The gown for the banquet was stunning, but it was shorter in length and had shorter sleeves than she was used to. "Forget it, take it off," Adelheid commanded the maids after trying on the dress. As the dress was removed, one of the maids spoke up. "I sincerely apologize, Your Majesty. I think the measurements we received from Kotrov used a different metric system from of Echmont. We made the dress based on Kotrov's measurements." "Then how did the measurement fit for the wedding dress?" added Adelheid. "The dress was made from different clothing stores. My apologies, Your Majesty." Adelheid leaned back in her chair and swept her hair up. "Well, it can't be helped. Get it mended, it doesn't matter if I'm late for the banquet," Adelheid replied firmly. The maids hesitated and looked at each other, unsure if they could carry out her commands. "We sincerely apologize, Your Majesty. Small repairs on large clothes are simple, but large repairs on small clothes are difficult. The start of the banquet will not be a problem, but it will undoubtedly be later than the end time," one of the maids explained. Adelheid clenched her teeth in frustration. How come it would be that difficult? Her mother's words echoed in her mind as she grappled with the conundrum before her. "Adele, you who's running around battling towers and monsters, must have belittled my fights inside the palace, right? After all, you are a general who has never stopped fighting. However, I never rested from my war, not even once. I am warning you, don't ever lower your guard and don't let yourself go in Echmont." For a moment, she remained silent. The dress before her, though beautiful, was not suitable for her wedding reception. It was not possible to dress in the Kotrov style for such an occasion. "Well, that leaves me with only two options," Adele said as the maids waited attentively for her next command. "Either I do not attend my own wedding banquet, or attend it by forcing myself into that small dress. Is that understood?" The maids lowered their heads, unable to respond to Adele's cold words. She straightened her back and shoulders, her mind turning to another matter. "Did Diane Poitiers manage all of my wedding's preparations?" The maids hesitated before nodding in affirmation. "The Emperor granted permission," one of them offered. "It's ridiculous. Seems like she wanted to show her superiority using a mere dress and the Emperor's affection." Adele could not help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. The maids looked embarrassed and afraid, but Adele paid them no mind. All she could focus on was the absurdity of it all. A chill settled over the room as Adele's golden eyes narrowed and her red lips drew into a line. Without realizing it, the maids swallowed nervously. "Bring me the wedding dress and gold crown I wore," Adele commanded. "I'm sorry, but that dress has already been worn," one of the maids replied. "I don't mind," Adele said firmly. Adele's thoughts were clear. She would not be blamed for her desire to gain advantage through a dress over an emperor's love. "She thinks too lightly of the Witch of Kotrov," Adele muttered, her eyes dark and menacing. The Echmont Palace was alive with activity as the grand banquet in honor of the emperor's marriage began in the evening. The hall was filled with palace employees carrying food and drinks, and nobles excited to celebrate the occasion. As the sun set, the atmosphere at the banquet became lively and festive. Yet, the main guests of honor, the emperor and empress, were nowhere to be seen. "I am sure the empress can't attend," She can't wear the prepared dress because it is too small, and she can't show up in Gotrov's dress. Meanwhile, Diane and the Duke of Despun greeted guests throughout the banquet hall. Diane flattered, the Duke of Despun assisted greatly in decorating this banquet hall. I'm flattered. It would not have been possible without our princess's excellent test, Your Highness. The Duke of Despun laughed, praising Diane as a princess, and the other nobles laughed along. Where in the world did you get that crystal, princess? One of the noble women asked. Oh, it's the Duke's eye, not mine, Diane replied, continuing to chat and laugh with the noblewomen. But even though everyone knew the reason for the banquet, no one dared to ask the question on everyone's mind, where are His Majesty the Emperor and Empress? Despite the light-hearted atmosphere, there was a sense of curiosity and intrigue as to the whereabouts of the main guests of honor. Oh, my goodness, that necklace, isn't this a new atelier piece? One of the ladies exclaimed as she pointed to Diane's necklace with a surprised expression. The other ladies rushed to praise her jewelry. Oh, my, you are right, I've heard these new products are stunning. I went to see them, but I sadly had to leave empty-handed after I heard that the princess had bought everything, one of them said. Oh my, these earrings are also part of a set, another added. The noblewomen all praised Diane, admiring the subtlety of her jewelry choices. But one of them couldn't help but ask with curiosity, oh, and I heard Your Majesty was still at the Ivory Palace on the first night of his marriage. Another chimed in, saying, I also heard it. That's one of a kind of love, princess. I envy you. Diane feigned a pitiful voice and said, Please don't say anything like that. I'm afraid Her Majesty might misinterpret. The noblewomen continued to praise and chat with Lady Diane, not because they wanted to know her better, but to curry her favor. Your Highness, actually the harvest yield at my estate isn't as good as in previous years. Would it be possible to consider a tax exemption? Your Highness, a tower has recently descended near our estate, Princess. Could you perhaps send strikers there? Orphaned ladies had been sweating profusely in front of Diane since birth, offering compliments, making eye contact, laughing and inquiring. Diane smiled softly and nodded her head gently. I'll make certain to inform Your Majesty, she said. Thank you, Your Highness. Our princess is so modest. The Emperor still delegated his authority over the palace administration to you. At this rate, well, the authority held by Her Highness is bigger than the Empress. What a dangerous statement you made there, a low voice interrupted Lennox's speech. Lennox turned his head, as did the ladies who had been praising Diane earlier, and all of them breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing the newcomer. Standing before them was a handsome man with a cold expression. Lionel Valdray, a representative of the Duke of Valdray, had come to the banquet on behalf of Theseus, who couldn't attend due to work. A group of large, middle-class nobles surrounded Lionel. The ladies took a step back, looking at Lionel's face. Lennox, however, seemed undeterred by Lionel's intimidating presence. He stood up straight, puffing out his chest and making a sour face. Diane frowned, aware of the danger of engaging in a confrontation with Lionel Valdray in such a setting. She tried to stop her brother, but Lennox's mouth was faster than his brain and he seemed determined to stand his ground. The Duke of Despun, meanwhile, turned his head with a small, dry cough, clearly uncomfortable with the tension between Lennox and Lionel. Did I say something I wasn't supposed to say? What's the problem? I didn't lie, did I? He scoffed. I need to stop this fight. Nothing good comes from fighting Lionel Valdray here. was thinking while panicked Diane. Do I need to remind you the reason this banquet is held for? You should be more careful of your words and actions. If you know your place, Lionel replied. Lennox's eyes bore into Lionel's back as he strode past, his mind reeling with anger. Diane's attempts to calm him went unnoticed as he inhaled deeply, preparing to confront Lionel. The crowded banquet hall was charged with tension as Lennox and Lionel squared off, the guests glancing nervously between the two men. Diane, her nerves frayed, cast her gaze towards the entrance, where another commotion had suddenly begun. As their attention shifted back to the entrance, a palpable wave of surprise and shock swept through the banquet hall, engulfing all those present. Diane felt a chill run down her spine and cold sweat bead on her forehead as she tried to comprehend what was happening. Even Lennox, whose anger had been building, was taken aback as he caught sight of the Empress at the entrance. Suddenly, a servant shouted out in excitement, "Her Majesty, she has arrived." All eyes turned towards the entrance, where the Empress stood, her commanding presence immediately drawing the attention of everyone in the hall. The guests stood up to bow and curtsy as she entered, and the banquet hall was filled with a new energy as everyone eagerly awaited her arrival. The Empress made a grand entrance, appearing in a stunning wedding gown that left all present in awe. The gold crown on her head glistened in the crystal light, adding to the ethereal beauty of the Empress. Her golden eyes shone brightly, matching the color of the crown and giving her an otherworldly appearance. Unlike her previous appearance at the banquet, her long black hair was now cascading down her shoulders in soft waves, giving her a softer, more approachable appearance. The Empress was petite and slender, but her presence commanded the attention of the room. The nobles who saw Adele Ulrich Echmont were struck by her intensity, her golden eyes sparkling like stars in the night sky, and her pale face glowing like moonlight. As she made her way towards the head of the banquet table, the guests around the entrance stepped back unconsciously, clearing a path for her. The musicians lowered their bows in respect, and even Lionel couldn't take his eyes off her as she passed by. The banquet hall was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the Empress's footsteps and the rustling of her gown. Adele cast a forlorn gaze at the empty throne, wishing that there was no emperor. She stood on the podium, which no one dared to climb, and then ascended to the throne. Turning to face the crowd, she shifted her gaze slowly and calmly from left to right, as if determined to scrutinize everyone gathered there. It made no difference that the queen was dressed in a wedding gown, her commanding aura captivated even the most powerful nobles. Who had come up with the nickname, Witch, for her? As the sound of someone gulping echoed through the hall, the queen's red lips slowly turned up in a smile, and her golden eyes folded and bent like the moon. Everyone held their breath as Adele, holding everyone's hearts in her hand, softly smiled and spoke. "I apologize, it seems like I'm a bit late." Diane took a deep breath as the Empress ascended the Emperor's stairs, a forbidden path for anyone else, with a regal grace that seemed almost effortless. The nobles around her held their breath, their eyes fixed on the Empress as she made her way to the throne. Diane felt a pang of frustration as she realized that the Empress was not at all bothered by the fact that she was wearing a wedding gown, unlike what she had expected. As the Empress scanned the crowd with her piercing golden eyes, her every move calculated and deliberate, the banquet hall was filled with a sense of unease. The guests seemed to shrink under her gaze, their words caught in their throats as they struggled to maintain their composure. The Empress's power and authority were undeniable as she surveyed her subjects like a queen surveying her kingdom. "How are you, Lord Despon? Did you enjoy the dinner?" The Empress's voice cut through the tension as she turned her gaze to Lord Despon, who sat next to Diane Poitiers. "You've arrived, Your Majesty. I've been waiting for Your Majesty's entrance," Lord Despun replied, trying to hide his unease. "Is that so?" The Empress's tone was cold and her gaze intense. The Empress gracefully took her seat, her back straight and her head held high. The orchestra began to play a grand and solemn song as she settled in, and the crowd of nobles fell silent. Adele scanned the room, taking in the attitudes of those around her. Some were paying close attention, while others seemed wary and on edge. She could read people like a book, and she knew that some of the nobles were already trying to read the political winds and gauge her position. As the crowd began to stir, a familiar face emerged from the throng. Lionel, a vassal noble of the Valdray family, stepped forward to greet the Empress. "Our deepest respect to Her Majesty." He looked up at her, his eyes scanning her form as she exchanged greetings with the other nobles. Adele, with her ease on horseback and her ability to dominate the crowd, seemed to fit the role of Empress perfectly. As she turned her head leisurely, she caught Lionel's eye once more. In the dim light of the banquet hall, his eyes appeared thick and dark. Lionel Valdray, Adele muttered his name to herself. Diane watched with a blank stare as the nobles scrambled to greet the Empress, a competition quickly ensuing. People who had been chatting and seeking friendship quickly changed to people who wanted to greet the Empress, creating a rare scene. "Our deepest respect to Her Majesty," all the hall greeted at the same time. "Nice meeting you all." But Adele's gaze passed over Diane, as if she was unremarkable, just like the attendants and maids who passed by. Diane felt a sense of contempt rise within her, as if the Empress had no interest in her. Clenching her fists, Diane ignored the long line of nobles and went straight to the podium. She didn't care about protocol, she just wanted the Empress to notice her. "Fine. If you don't want to see me properly, I'll make you to," she muttered under her breath. Hi. Want more? From AudiNovel. Subscribe.